Good day, and welcome to the Puxin Limited second quarter 2020 earnings conference call. All participants will be in a listen-only mode. Should you need assistance, please signal a conference specialist by pressing the star key followed by 0. After today's presentation, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. Please note this event is being recorded. I would now like to turn the conference over to Nadia Wang, Senior Investor Relations Manager. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Anita. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Puxin second quarter 2020 earnings conference call. This is Xiaoxi Wang, Senior Investor Relations Manager at Puxin Limited. We appreciate your time and ongoing interest in Puxin. Our financial results were released earlier today and are available on the company's IR website at ir.pxjy.com. On the call today, we have Mr. Yunlong, the company's founder, chairman, and chief executive officer, and Mr. Peng Wang, the company's Chief Financial Officer. Yunlong will give a brief introduction of the company's business operations and highlights, followed by Peng, who will go through the financials and guidance. They will both be available to answer your questions during the Q&A sessions that follows. Please be reminded that this call may contain forward-looking statements made under the safe harbor provisions of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. Such statements are based on management's current expectations and current operating conditions, and relate to events that involve unknown risks, uncertainties, and other factors, all of which are difficult to predict and many of which are beyond the company's control, which may cause the company's actual results, performance, or achievements to differ materially from those in the forward-looking statements. A number of information regarding these risks, uncertainties, and other factors are included in our public filings with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The company does not undertake any obligation to update any forward-looking statement as a result of new information, future events, or otherwise, except by required law. With that, I will now turn the call over to Mr. Xia. Mr. Xia will give his remarks in Chinese, and Jessie Jin from ICA, our investor relations advisory firm, will translate for him in English. Mr. Xia, please go ahead.
女士、先生们，大家好！欢迎各位参加普新教育2020财年第二季度财报的电话会议。继通过一季度的新冠疫情的突袭，普新教育全体师生风雨同舟，顺利步入后疫情时代。在教育部与国家卫生健康委指导之下，各地落实全国大中小学段全面的复课工作，整个教育行业已经真正走入正轨。在此，我们要再次感谢政府的各部门、社会各界以及全体普信人的付出，为全国莘莘学子提供了最有力的社会、精神和教育资源方面的支持。2020年第二季度，新冠疫情波动，普信教育坚持以保证师生身心健康为第一要务，确保师生确诊病例为0的坚守。普信教育在刚过去的第二季度稳中求进，报名学生人次同比增长 18.1%， 达到 85.7 万人次。普信以优异的教学质量赢得了学生和家长的高度认可。虽然受到新冠疫情的冲击，普信第二季度净收入仍取得超过6亿元人民币的成绩，净利润超过3500万人民币。那对比去年同期的 1.9 亿人民币的亏损，那么普信实现了比较高的盈利增长。在 non-GAAP 口径下， EBITDA 利润超过8000万元人民币。去年同期呢，这个数字是亏损2600万人民币。 我们同时在运营成本控制方面取得了喜人的成果。通过调整营销策略，有效地降低了暖盖普销售及管理费用。在这方面呢，与去年同期相比，分别下降了12.4%和30.3%。这当中，我们延续了以 K12 业务为核心的发展目标。该业务在第二季度实现净收入4.2亿元人民币，同比增长14%。受海外疫情影响，留学业务净收入同比下滑39.9%。虽然收入下滑了，但是经过过去几年的持续的努力，留学业务的盈利显著改善。EBITDA 利润去年同期呢是亏损9000万，今年同期第二季度取得了将近400万人民币的 EBITDA 利润。网校业务方面，通过我们过去的这个持续的努力和投入，已经取得了长足的进步。今年的第二季度净收入近2400万人民币，较去年同期增长超过6倍。疫情使得普信人思考、审视走过的路，回顾我们内生增长加外延并购的双轮驱动的发展战略，普信 PBS 投后动作在改善并购项目运营能力以及财务表现两方面是切实可行的。结转收入、经营利润与学生人次均得到有效的提升。外延并购呢，经过有机整合后，实现了进一步增长，推动了普信教育的有机内生的成长。普信在2015年和2016年收购的大部分的 K12 学校的暖 gap 经营利润，在 PBS 系统运营支持下实现了扭亏为盈。未来普信将继续坚定运用 PBS， 落实降本增效。教育行业从总体上看，今年的二季度逐渐开始恢复，但疫情余波未尽，普信也不会懈怠。展望三季度，我们将以新的精神面貌，继续重点推进 K12 业务与 OM 战略。预计网校业务有望实现快速增长。随着普信品牌的逐渐强大，我们的品牌溢价能力也会逐步提高。接下来，我们请普信的 CFO 王鹏老师来介绍财务数据。
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and good morning to you all. Thank you for joining Puxin Limited second quarter 2020 earnings conference call. Together, the teaching staff and students have overcome the challenges brought by the COVID-19 pandemic over the past few months. Under the guidance of the Ministry of Education and the National Health Commission, local governments have coordinated with schools and universities to resume classes, and we are glad to see the entire education industry is finally back on track. Again, we appreciate the contribution of government departments, all sectors of the community, as well as the staff at Puxin. Thank you for providing your continued social, mental, and educational support. In the second quarter of 2020, though there were a few bounce-back occurrences of COVID-19 in some areas of China, Puxin continued to place the mental and physical health of our students and teaching staff to our first priority. We have had 0 COVID-19 case and will work our best to keep this record going forward. Puxin has made steady progress in the second quarter. Student enrollments increased by 18.1% year-over-year to 857,000. Puxin once again won the recognition of students and parents with our excellent teaching quality. Despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, net revenues in the second quarter exceeded RMB 600 million. Net income was above RMB 35 million compared to a net loss of RMB 190 million in the second quarter of 2019. Puxin also continued to show profitability in non-GAAP measures. Non-GAAP EBITDA was over RMB 80 million compared to negative RMB 26 million. We also made progress in cost control. By refining our marketing and sales strategy, non-GAAP selling expenses decreased by 12.4% year-over-year. Decreased by 12.4% year-over-year. In addition, non-GAAP administrative expenses dropped by 30.3% year-over-year. In the second quarter of 2020, K-12, the core business segment of Puxin, achieved net revenues of RMB 420 million, an increase of 14% year-over-year. Due to the impact of the pandemic in overseas markets, net revenues of study abroad services decreased by 39.9%. However, its profitability was improved during the second quarter of 2020. EBITDA was approximately RMB 4 million compared to negative RMB 90 million in the same period of 2019. As for Puxin Online School, benefited from previous strategic investments, has made impressive progress. Net revenues were approximately RMB 24 million, an increase of more than 6 times year-over-year. The COVID-19 pandemic gave us a unique opportunity to reflect on our business. In terms of Puxin's organic growth plus M&A dual engine strategy, we found Puxin business system effective for improving the operational and financial performance of the acquired schools. Positive achievements can be seen in carryover income, non-GAAP income, and student enrollment. These have proved that the acquisition and integration approach is truly driving the organic internal growth of Puxin. For example, the non-GAAP income of the majority of K-12 schools acquired in 2015 and 2016 became positive after adopting Puxin business system. These results have reaffirmed the strategic role of PBS and its capability to optimize capital structure. Overall, the education industry has recovered substantially since the second quarter of this year. However, we will never slacken our efforts. Looking into the third quarter of 2020, we will continue our focus on the K-12 business segment and the online merge offline strategy. We expect that Puxin Online School may continue to achieve a rapid growth. We believe Puxin will gradually become a premium brand with strong profitability. Now I will hand the call over to Mr. Wang, our CFO, who will walk you through our financial details.
Thank you, Mr. Shah. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Please be reminded that all amounts quoted here will be in RMB, and all percentage increases will be on a year-over-year basis, unless otherwise stated. Please also refer to our earnings release for detailed information of our comparative financial performance on a year-over-year basis. Starting with the financial results for the second quarter of 2020, net revenues were RMB 601.1 million, a decrease of 5% from the second quarter of 2019. This decrease was primarily due to the adverse impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on demand for study abroad tutoring services. Net revenues of K-12 tutoring services increased by 14% year-over-year to 419.7 million. In the second quarter of 2020, the student enrollments of K-12 tutoring services, including group class, personalized tutoring, full-time tutoring services, reached 598,369. Net revenue of Puxin Online School significantly increased to 24 million from 3 million in the same period 2019. Student enrollments of Puxin Online School were 249,452 in the second quarter of 2020. Net revenues of study abroad tutoring services decreased by 39.9% year-over-year to 157.4 million. This was primarily due to a sharp drop in student enrollments from 15,696 to 8,853 in the second quarter of 2020, affected by the global spread of the COVID-19 pandemic in major countries of the world. Cost of revenue slightly decreased by 0.4% year-over-year to 331.4 million, primarily due to a decrease in staff cost, which reflected the decreased demand for study abroad services attributable to the COVID-19 pandemic. Cost of revenues, excluding share-based compensation expenses, decreased by 0.3% year-over-year to 330.8 million. Gross profit was 269.7 million, a decrease of 10.1% year-over-year. Gross margin was 44.9% compared to 47.4% for the same period in 2019. Total operating expenses decreased by 37% year-over-year to 295.5 million. Selling expenses decreased by 13.1% year-over-year to 210.1 million. Selling expenses, excluding share-based compensation expenses, decreased by 12.4% to 207 million. This was primarily due to a decrease in sales staff performance-based compensation, attributable to decreased demand for our study abroad services caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as our cost control measures to improve operation efficiency. General and administrative expenses decreased by 62.4% year-over-year to 85.3 million. General and administrative expenses, excluding share-based compensation expenses, decreased by 30.3% year-over-year to 82.4 million. The decreases were primarily due to our cost control measures to improve operation efficiency. Total share-based compensation expenses allocated to related cost of revenues operating expenses decreased by 94.1% year-over-year to 6.8 million. The decrease was primarily due to a decrease in the number of options vested in the second quarter of 2020 compared to the same period of 2019. Operating loss was 25.8 million, a decrease of 84.7% year-over-year. Operating margin was negative 4.3% in the second quarter of 2020, compared to negative 26.7% for the same period in 2019. Operating income for K-12 tutoring services was 19.3 million, compared to operating loss of 54.5 million in the second quarter of 2019, while operating margin improved to 4.6 points from negative 14.8% in the second quarter of 2019. Adjusted operating loss was 19.1 million, a decrease of 64.3% year-over-year. Adjusted operating margin was negative 3.2% compared to negative 8.4% in the same period of the prior year. Net income attributable to Puxin Limited was 36.6 million, compared to net loss attributable to Puxin Limited of RMB 194.6 million during the second quarter of 2019. Basic and diluted net income per ADS attributable to Puxin Limited were 0.42 and 0.42, compared to basic and diluted net loss per ADS attributable to Puxin Limited of 2.28 and 2.28 during the same period of 2019. Adjusted net income attributable to Puxin Limited was 45.2 million, compared to adjusted net loss attributable to Puxin Limited of 60.7 million during the second quarter of 2019. Adjusted basic and diluted net income per ADS attributable to Puxin Limited was 0.52 and 0.51, compared to adjusted basic and diluted net loss per ADS attributed to Puxin Limited of 0.71 and 0.71 during the same period 2019. EBITDA was 71.8 million, compared to negative 159.8 million in the second quarter of 2019. EBITDA of K-12 tutoring services was 109.1 million, compared to negative 50.3 million in the second quarter of 2019. EBITDA margin was 12% in the second quarter of 2020, compared to negative 25.2% in the same period in 2019. Adjusted EBITDA was 80.4 million, compared to negative 25.8 million in the second quarter of 2019. Adjusted EBITDA margin was 13.4%, compared to negative 4.1% in the same period 2019. For the financial results for the 6 months ended June 30, 2020, net revenues were 1,352.4 million, an increase of 8.3% year-over-year. This increase was primarily due to the continued growth momentum of student enrollments. Net revenues for K-12 tutoring services increased by 26.3% year-over-year to 943 million. In the first half of 2020, the total student enrollments of K-12 tutoring services, including group classes, personalized tutoring, and full-time tutoring services, reached 1,165,074. Net revenue of Puxin Online School significantly increased to 47 million. Students' enrollments of Puxin Online School were 607,066 for the first 6 months of 2020. Net revenues of study abroad tutoring services decreased by 27.1% year-over-year to 360.4 million. Study abroad consulting and tutoring services have 22,809 student enrollments in the first half of 2020, compared to 32,366 in the same period of 2019. This was primarily due to the global spread of the COVID-19 pandemic in many countries of the world. Cost revenues increased by 9.5% year-over-year to 731.6 million. Cost revenues, excluding share-based compensation expenses, increased by 9.7% year-over-year to 930.4 million. Gross profits was 620.8 million, an increase of 7% year-over-year. Gross margin was 45.9%, compared to 46.5% for the same period 2019. Total operating expenses decreased by 27.4% year-over-year to 642.9 million. Selling expenses decreased by 5.1% year-over-year to 440.7 million. Selling expenses, excluding share-based compensation expenses, decreased by 4.1% year-over-year to 433.5 million. General and administrative expenses decreased by 52% year-over-year to 202.3 million. General administrative expenses, excluding share-based compensation expenses, decreased by 13.5% year-over-year to 195.5 million. The decreases were primarily due to our cost control measures to improve our operation efficiency under the COVID-19 pandemic. Total share-based compensation expenses allocated to related costs, revenues, and operating expenses decreased by 92.8% year-over-year to 15.2 million. The decrease was primarily due to a decrease in the number of options vested in the first 6 months of 2020 compared to the same period in 2019. Operating loss decreased by 92.7% year-over-year to 22.2 million. Operating margin was negative 1.6% in the first 6 months of 2020 compared to negative 24.4% for the same period in 2019. Operating income of K-12 tutoring services was 86.0 million compared to operating loss of 80.4 million in the same period since 2019, while operating margin improved to 9.1% from negative 10.8%. Adjusted operating loss decreased by 92.7% year-over-year to 7 million. Adjusted operating margin was negative 0.5% compared to negative 7.6% in the same period of 2019. Net loss attributed to Puxin Limited was 6.9 million, a decrease of 98.5% year-over-year. Basic diluted net loss per ADS attributed to Puxin Limited was 0.08 compared to basic diluted net loss per ADS attributable to Puxin Limited of 5.28 during the same period 2019. Adjusted net income attributable to Puxin Limited was 70.6 million compared to adjusted net loss attributable to Puxin Limited of 134.4 million during the same period of 2019. Adjusted basic diluted net income per ADS attributable to Puxin Limited were 0.81 and 0.79 compared to adjusted basic diluted net loss per ADS attributable to Puxin Limited of 1.60 and 1.60 during the same period of 2019. EBITDA was 67.9 million compared to negative 351.7 million for the first 6 months of 2019. EBITDA of K-12 tutoring services was 170.3 million compared to negative 112.1 million in the same period of 2019. EBITDA margin was 5% in the first 6 months of 2020 compared to negative 28.2% in the same period 2019. Adjusted EBITDA was 145.4 million compared to negative 42.7 million in the same period of 2019. Adjusted EBITDA margin was 10.8% compared to negative 3.4% in the same period of 2019. Next, we'll move on to the balance sheet. As of June 30, 2020, the company has an agreed amount of cash and cash equivalents and the current portion of restricted cash of 569.6 million compared to 606.3 million as of December 31, 2019. The current portion of restricted cash consists of primary deposits with the Chinese commercial banks as collateral for our bank borrowings within 1 year term. Finally, for guidance, for the third quarter ended September 30, 2020, based on the information available as of the date of this press release, the company expects net revenues to be between RMB 816.8 million and 866.6 million, which represents a decrease of 18% to 13% year-over-year. This forecast reflects the company's current and preliminary review of the market and operational conditions, which are subject to change. This concludes our prepared remarks. I will now turn the call over to the operator and open the call up for Q&A. Operator, we are ready to take questions.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. To ask a question, you may press star then one on your touch-tone phone. If you're using a speakerphone, please pick up your handset before pressing the keys. To withdraw your question, please press star then two. For the benefit of all participants on today's call, if you wish to ask your question to management in Chinese, please immediately repeat your question in English. At this time, we'll pause momentarily to assemble our roster. The first question today comes from Sophia Zhang with Citi. Please go ahead.
沙老师、王老师好，我是那个中金公司的研究员张肖丹 Sophie， 非常感谢接受我的提问啊，我这边一共有3个问题，首先第一个是就是从我们目前暑期的情况来看的话，我们线下的业务恢复进展如何了？那么另外也想请2位介绍一下，就是我们这个 OMO 战略目前的推进情况，以及我们下半年的这个收并购的计划。那我这边也就是翻译一下我自己的问题啊。So thanks management for taking my question. My first question is, how has our offline segment been recovered in terms of retention and recruitment of students for our summer courses? And my second question is, so could you please provide some updates on the implementation of our OMO strategy and also some color on our M&A plans for the second half? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. For the first question of the reopening of offline learning centers, we are happy to say over 90% of current offline learning centers have been reopened step by step, though as we have to get the permission from the local educational committees and those pandemic fighting authorities. Unfortunately, we have 2 major cities which are still under the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, which are Beijing and Dalian. As you may have known, Dalian, we have two K-12 bodies operating there, which makes Dalian the largest single city of K-12 operation for Puxin. Due to the outbreak of the pandemic by the end of June, the offline learning centers in Dalian have been closed, and all the program classes have to be transferred to online. So yes, we did have some negative impact due to the second round of outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in Beijing and Dalian. For Dalian, the impact is mainly on the shoulder of K-12 business, and in Beijing, the burden is mainly on the study abroad business. So yes, we did have some negative impact, especially in Beijing and Dalian, but we're still optimistic about the rebounding of the business in all of our offline learning centers. As to the OMO strategy, we've been implementing the OMO strategy during the pandemic the period. We had several pilot programs in our tier 2 cities like Taiyuan, like Chengdu, which are quite optimistic for the first pilot programs. But it in terms of revenue, it only contributes a a very small part of the revenue. So OMO strategy is one of the priorities of business, but it still needs time to play a significant part of our business. And as to the third question about the M&A, we did not make any acquisition during the first half of this year, also due to the outbreak of the COVID-19. But we've been working hard to get back on track with our MS strategy. Again, we will stick to our acquisition and integration strategy. And with the outbreak of the COVID-19, we can say more targets are available due to the pandemic, and we will work hard to get back on track. Thank you.
谢谢王老师。
好，谢谢。
Again, if you have a question, please press star, then 1. Since there appears to be no further question, I would like to turn the conference back over to Nadia Wang for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Anita. In closing, on behalf of the entire management team of Puxin, we'd like to thank you again for your participation of today's call. If you have any further questions in the future, please feel free to contact us at ir@pxjy.com or puxin@icaasia.com. Thank you all.
This conference is now concluded. Thank you for attending today's presentation. You may now disconnect.